Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If there are any guys joining us tonight, my name is DeAndre Marshall, and I'm the Director of Training for the International Human Trafficking Institute. During the month of September, we have been focused on presenting guest speakers who will not only discuss their work around protecting our children, but give us suggestions and strategies for how we can work to protect our kids ourselves. We want to thank you tonight for joining us for this critical conversation around the exposure of our kids to pornography. We know that this is a sensitive subject, and so we thank you for joining us tonight for this conversation. IHTI has invited Samantha Wechsler from Cultured Reframed to educate us on ways to address pornography when it happens. So, I just said to you that this is a sensitive subject. One of the things that I would like to ask you to do is to share this video with others once we are completed. I actually heard Samantha doing a virtual presentation earlier this summer, and she was phenomenal. And that was one of the reasons why she was asked to come tonight to sit in with us and talk to you about pornography and kids. What people don't realize is that this is something that is occurring on a daily basis, whether by accident or whether kids are seeking out this information. But Samantha is a proven leader who will bring her expertise to this conversation. She has facilitated this exact conversation with organizations and insisting them with changing and growing and developing and being innovative. She's also an effective programmer. Much of her career, I just want to give you a little background about her so that you will know, has been devoted to creating and improving and expanding opportunities for children and youth. So what better person to have tonight as our guest speaker? As the executive director of Culture Reframed, Samantha is in collaboration with the founder and the president when they are setting overall strategies for organizations and outlining short, medium, and long-term goals and activities that they are going to complete as an organization to fulfill their organization's mission. She's a frequent presenter, and you'll find out the reason why tonight as she comes to us. She has presented in online platforms before. She is equipped to offer us ways that we can do something to prepare our children in case this conversation comes up. Better yet, for us to be able to initiate the conversation to prepare our kids in case they run across pornography or someone shows them pornography. So I just ask you to lean into her conversation tonight, to put questions in the chat box if you have them. But I really want to take the time now to say thank you to Samantha for joining us. And we're going to sit back and listen to you teach us and tell us how we can talk to our kids about this critical conversation. Samantha.
Thank you so much, DeAndre. That was such a generous introduction, and I hope I can live up to your expectations. I will be sharing quite a bit tonight, and I will move. I know we have limited time, and I know that there are a lot of other places that you could be tonight, and so I commend you for being here for this difficult but critical conversation. And as DeAndre said, it's really important to share this information with as many people as you can think of when this is over. So thank you for being here. I do just want to say, DeAndre mentioned it's a sensitive topic, and the first part of the presentation does get into some kind of tough information. And I will do my best to not make it too disturbing, but this information is just inherently disturbing. And then the second part of the presentation, be sure you stay for it, is more hopeful. And it is a lot more information than DeAndre saw earlier this year when she saw my presentation at the global
Wow.
summit that I was involved in. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I have a PowerPoint and I'm going to go through a whole bunch of slides with you. So here we go. So as DeAndre said, I am the Executive Director of Culture Reframed, which we like to think that we are solving the public health crisis of the digital age. And we refer to pornography as the public health crisis of the digital age. So we are living in a porn culture, and a lot of what we talk about and what we're committed to is looking for solutions for children and families and helping people to understand the consequences. Now, I know that this particular talk is called Help, My Child Has Been Exposed to Porn, 3 Things to Know and Do. I just want to say one thing about that. Children, it's unlikely that children at this stage will not be exposed to porn. And I will get into how and why in a moment. It is not so simple as just 3 things to know and do. I'm going to give you a whole lot more than just 3 things, but we will pare it down toward the end so that it's pretty clear what you're leaving with, I hope. So the goals of tonight presentation, I hope that you leave with a deeper understanding of the nature of mainstream pornography, and that is what we're talking about. We're talking about mainstream pornography here. I hope you leave with increased knowledge about the harms and consequences of pornography and increased skills and confidence to help build resilience and resistance in kids to porn. It doesn't matter if they're your own kids, if they're friends' kids, if they're nephews, or if you work with kids. If you are in touch with kids, this is important information to know. Questions for reflection. We're not going to spend much time on this, but I just want you to think about these things as we move through this information tonight. First one is, if you've seen pornography, when was the first time that you saw it and how did it make you feel? Was there someone important in your life who served as a role model or mentor? Nothing to do with pornography, just someone that was important to you as you were growing up. And when was a time when you stood up for your own values and beliefs, even though it was risky or unpopular? We are dealing with a risky and unpopular issue here, believe it or not. So I'm going to get into how the culture essentially grooms our young people to be what we think of as porn ready. So how internet porn is changing teen sex. I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. These are magazines that you might see at a grocery store. They are really available. So that image, the girls these days just seem to come to the set porn ready. That is Joanna Angel. She is a pornographer, and you'll see why. This is an ad. It's a Tom Ford advertisement for fragrance. Victoria's Secret. We're all very familiar with these kinds of ads. Cosmopolitan, Maxim, Cosmopolitan again. I have to say that often when I'm in the grocery store, I just don't even look at these kinds of things. This I'm just pointing out, Victoria's Secret ad. What often people don't think about, right, is how much these photos are altered. I mean, we know about airbrushing and all kinds of things, but I mean, this whole thing is proportionally off. And I think what's important to recognize is that even though we know that this might have been altered or surely was altered, these images bypass our prefrontal lobes. And even if we know they're not real, they are getting into our brains in a way that affects the way we feel about ourselves and about others. More Victoria's Secret. I want to just say a couple of things here about race. In our pornified culture, the way we think about it, it is mostly white women. When we are talking about women of color, there is specifically this animalistic portrayal. And we could have a whole other presentation on what that means, what the implications of that are. But you can see here, this is a classic example of how a woman of color might be displayed in the media. So we show this image from Victoria's Secret because there's something here about media literacy that is important. And it's this notion of the reader is inscribed in the image. And so this woman is standing here for Victoria's Secret. And who do you think she's talking to? Who do you think that is for? We know it's for men. It is for the male gaze. She is not saying, you know, hey mom, let's go for a cup of coffee after this photo shoot. And so all of these images are really geared toward the male gaze. I wanted to share this quote. It is something that Dr. Gail Dines, who founded Culture Reframed several years ago, she was doing interviews. She wrote a book called Pornland. And in the process of doing interviews for that book, she was interviewing convicted child molesters who were in prison. And she learned more in this one interview, I think, than in all of the rest of her research in a certain way, because he said to her, the culture did a lot of the grooming for me. And when he said that to her, her mind just exploded and she realized what was really happening on a cultural level. And this is someone who has been teaching sociology and is a brilliant thinker, but he was the one who really pointed out the culture is doing the grooming for pornography. So what is the impact of digital culture on teens? We know that kids are on screens a whole lot more even before the pandemic and much more so now. So I want to go into some of the statistics around digital culture. 76% of teens ages 13 to 17 use Instagram, 75% of teens use Snapchat, 66% are on Facebook, 47% of teens use Twitter. I do want to say that these statistics change a lot for a lot of different reasons. They're constantly changing, for one thing, because technology is always changing and what's cool is changing, but they also change by age and even region. I think what's important here is just to get a kind of broad sense, but when you're actually talking to young people, you want to ask them what they're using, because, you know, a group of teens could have some random app that no one's ever heard of. If that's the app that those teens are using, that's what they're going to be using. It doesn't matter so much what is actually popular across the country, but I did want to give you just a broad sense of how kids are using these different things. Instagram, 800 million equals the total number of monthly active users. 40 billion equals the photos uploaded to date. 170 per second, which just makes my mind kind of explode. This is, I think, important. In a study by the Royal Society for Public Health, Instagram was actually deemed to be the worst app for mental health and well-being. Leads to things like increased anxiety, bullying, fear of missing out, which FOMO and can't remember the other term, but that's a common one. Selfies. Do you all remember a time when we used to take pictures of other people? There's this really intense culture around taking selfies, and they are often extremely hypersexualized, as you can see in this one. Percent of Snapchat photos that are selfies, just in your own mind, take a guess, see how close you are. 74%. Number of selfies posted on Instagram every second, take a guess in your own mind. 1,000 every second. Number of selfies taken each day, take another guess. 93 million. And 19 out of 20 teens have taken a selfie. I suspect that these numbers are post-pandemic. We're not post-pandemic, but since the pandemic began, I think these are probably a lot higher. So there was the most downloaded APA report was on hypersexualized culture, specifically around the effects on girls. So girls learn to self-objectify, which can lead to increased levels of all of these things that are bulleted. Suicidal ideation, body loathing, early pregnancy, self-harming, anxiety, depression. Hypersexualization leads to these things in girls. generally across the board. I get people a lot of the time telling me, oh, but these young girls actually feel like they're in their power and they're so much more sexually expressive. But we know from the research that the outcomes are not good when you're self-objectifying. So perp culture, part 2, the porn industry websites and apps. I want to go through a bit. Again, this is the same image that you saw earlier. Pornography is teaching young people a whole different version of sex. And globally, young people get their sex education first and foremost from pornography. In the US, only 26 states are required or mandated to offer sex education. Only 13 of those are required that the sex education be, quote, medically accurate. None of these programs, none of the sex education is actually taking pornography into consideration. And given how many young people are engaging with pornography for all sorts of reasons, again, that I will get into, it's completely irrelevant to these young people. And this is a quote. There's an entire generation of young people who think sex ends with a money shot to the face. So ejaculation on the face, which there are lots of implications of that as well. What we know, and this is from a survey done at Indiana University, is that parents don't actually know what's going on. And there's what has been referred to as the parental naivete gap. Half as many parents thought their 14 to 18-year-olds had actually seen porn as had in fact watched it. And then depending on the sex act, parents underestimated what their kids saw by as much as 10 times. So that is where Culture Reframed is actually really trying to address the problem. Because if parents don't know what's going on and they're sticking their head in the sand, we're really in trouble. Kids have a secret digital life. And they can get around a whole lot of things. So that's what we're going to talk about as well. There are emojis that hide porn. This is for penis. This is for buttocks, balls. This is oral sex. Also any kind of water droplets, oral sex. I'm getting back to just kind of images on Snapchat and other things. This will be as disturbing as I think it will get. There are people who are, and this is increased also with the pandemic, but being on Snapchat and other platforms and basically having your own pornography site, essentially. And all of these, Instagram, Snapchat, and other apps are normalizing porn, making them a gateway to the porn industry sites. I'm not actually I'm going to skip over this slide because it's a lot of the business side of things. But one thing to note on this slide is that 35% of all internet downloads are pornographic. And porn sites get more visitors each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. So wrap your head around that. MindGeek. I don't know if anyone has heard of MindGeek. If you look them up, it would be very hard to figure out that they have a monopoly on the pornography industry. We were giving a presentation in LA a number of years ago, and they are so undercover about what they're doing, but they manage, essentially, they are the place for porn activity. A woman came up after the presentation. Dr. Dines had given a presentation to this group. A woman came up in tears, and she had two 11-year-old twins. And she was in tears because her husband worked for MindGeek, and she thought that he was a lawyer for MindGeek, and she had no idea that MindGeek does what it does. MindGeek owns 9 of the 15 most popular and lucrative porn sites in the world. Part of what I'm doing here or pointing out is that this is an industry, and it is an industry that targets young people. Research shows that the first age of viewing pornography is on average between 11 and 14. We know anecdotally that it is actually much younger. It's 8 to 10 and even younger. And one of the things that's happening is that we don't actually have research on this, but we've been hearing it more and more and more from nurses and health practitioners that child-on-child sexual abuse is on the rise. And what's happening is that very young boys are acting out porn sex acts that they have seen on often younger siblings. It's really important to think about the developing brain of a young person, 5-year-old brain, preteen brain, teen brain, 20-year-old brain. These images bypass the prefrontal lobes. They do that for adults as well, but our young people their brains are forming. And so when the younger the child is exposed to porn, and if there's repeated exposure, the much more likely that there's going to become habitual and even potentially addictive use. And the younger people get exposed, the longer it takes to recover from habitual consumption. One of the things we know is that it is violent, and that's mentioned before in one of the most well-known studies on this from 2010, and it's only become more extreme since then. 90% of scenes contained at least one aggressive act if both physical and verbal aggression were combined. Some of the physical aggression is gagging, choking, slapping. Verbal aggression is calling a woman a bitch or a whore or a slut. The content of mainstream pornography, it's very common to see gagging, rough anal sex, ejaculation on the face, which I mentioned before, the money shot, ATM, which is ass to mouth, hair pulling, and spitting in the face. If a young person sees this stuff, there's all sorts of it can be this toxic stew that's a combination of arousal and shame. Often young people are unintentionally exposed, so they don't even know, they have no idea what they're going to enter into. This is a quote just to share just how bad it can be. I'm not going to read it out loud because you can see it. The future, one of the things about today's porn and the extreme market, the gonzo market, is that so many of the fans want to see so much more extreme stuff. And that has a lot to do with becoming desensitized, so that to get the same sense of arousal, they need to become increasingly extreme. So there's a lot of people who say that porn doesn't have a negative effect. We have 40 years of peer-reviewed research. This is just a few examples of studies. On culturereframed.org, very soon we're going to have a whole section that has an academic library of peer-reviewed articles. So if people are looking for the research and really want to see what has been done, we will have that available. We know some health effects from these research papers. There's a limited capacity for intimacy, more likely to use coercive tactics, including sexting. I'm not going to get into sexting today so much, although it's a really, really important topic. Increased engagement in risky sexual behaviors, increased likelihood of perpetuating sexual harassment and rape, and also not intervening when witnessing something like that. Increased anxiety and depression. I've already talked about habitual and addictive use. Erectile dysfunction is increasing at a rapid rate, and that actually may be one of the most might be one of the catalysts, I think, for change, because it's become so much more of an issue. So how do we change our toxic culture? It's not hopeless. It's never too early to have these conversations. It's never too late. And I think everybody, especially people who are engaging with young people, can make a difference. We talk about it kind of the Gulliver strategy. We tie the monster down piece by piece. So Culture Reframed, Dr. Gail Dines used to go out and do these presentations, share what I just shared with you times 10 sometimes, and leave people completely devastated about what was happening. And she realized that she needed to actually do something and start providing some solutions for people. So she created an organization called Culture Reframed. Our vision is a world based on equality and empathy, free from the harms of hypersexualized media and porn culture. We do focus specifically on the harms of porn on young people and children. Our mission is to raise awareness and provide education and resources to build resilience and resistance in children to hypersexualized media and porn culture. And we say to build resilience and resistance because we know that the industry itself is not going away. So how do we think about this? We have young people at the center, and we think about this from a public health perspective, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. And we've started to think about, well, who are all the people who are engaging with young people? This is not an exhaustive list, just some examples, but educators. We have mental health, medical, legal professionals. We have parents and parent groups, youth and family advocates. We have activists. Peers aren't on this list, but peers are a hugely important factor. And who are the experts? So these names may not mean anything to you, but I do just want to point out that this organization has from the beginning been very multidisciplinary and collaborative, and it's the way we've approached our program development as well. So the organization has taken a public health approach to this issue. Why have we taken a public issue? Because we don't believe it's a private problem. We believe this is a societal problem. It is not just one family, one child. It is the numbers are huge for one thing, and also people are, as I mentioned earlier, people are being targeted. So expecting a young person not to see pornography is a little bit like asking a child not to breathe polluted air in a polluted city. It's just not possible. It is around us everywhere. There are 4 steps in a public health approach. I don't want to stay on this for too long, but I just want to give you a sense of where we are in our own interventions. Defining the problem, which we have done over and over again, and I spent the first part of this presentation doing that. Identifying risk and protective factors. Developing and evaluating solutions. So we've been in the process of developing programs, and now we're in the stage of trying to get everyone we can to use our programs. So what are the key protective factors? Well, there are a number of them, but the ones that we have keyed in on are parents, educators, and medical professionals. So those are the people, and when I say parents, I should just say parents and caregivers. I hope that, I should have said that earlier, but we are really talking about parents and caregivers. Parents don't want to know this information. That's why we have this parental naivete gap that I mentioned earlier, but they need to know what porn really is. It is not the Playboy or the Hustler of the 70s or 80s. Those weren't good either, but it is so much worse than it ever was. They need to know why it matters, which I've just explained to you about the consequences. When to talk to kids about it. So a lot of times parents will hear this presentation and say, oh my gosh, I have to talk to my kids right away, and they'll run home and they'll have the porn talk. And then they freak their kid out about it. No child wants to sit across from an adult, face to face, eye to eye, and have a conversation about pornography. So we have lots of tips about how to have the conversation, when to have it when you're cooking dinner together, have it when you're, in an activity and you're engaged in other things. You can have it in the car. You have a captive audience and you're not actually looking face to face. Also, how to talk to kids about it, because that can be really important too, of course, and then what to say. So I'm going to get into a little bit of that. Parents don't know what to do when they find out this information. They think, oh, I'll just call a friend, but their friends don't know either. So what we have done is actually create, and I've referred to this a little bit, we have created programs for parents. We have a program for parents of tweens and a program for parents of teens. I don't recommend waiting until your child is a tween. You can have conversations when your child is 5 or when a child is 5, not about porn specifically, but having conversations that help scaffold, age-appropriate conversations that help scaffold the conversations for later. On the other hand, it's never too late. It's really important that people don't say, oh, well, I didn't start talking to my kid at 5 or 8 or 9 or 12. Now my kid is 15, it's too late. It is never too late. The thing to do in that case is to sit down and say, I just learned this information. I'm sorry I didn't know sooner. Let's talk about it. So some sample topics in our programs, which are online and free, parents of tweens, we talk about boundaries, consent, and privacy, managing technology, navigating online and offline friendships, masturbation, fantasy, and porn, leading discussions skillfully. These are just samples. Parents of Teens program, physical, emotional, and cognitive development of teens. There is a lot going on for teenagers in all kinds of ways, and we've all been teens before, but we didn't know what was going on either, and it's really important and helpful to understand those benchmarks of development. Healthy relationships, what that looks like now, toxic masculinity in our culture, sexting and the digital footprint, a hugely important topic. We have a whole module on that. And then, of course, and this is the connection and why I'm here tonight, predators, human trafficking, and safety, because there is a link and a very strong link that people often don't acknowledge or recognize. The programs are organized by modules. They are research-based, they are user-friendly, they're multimedia, they're interactive, and they're flexible for varied levels of engagement. So people can go on for 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, whatever they need. We have also added enrichment sections that go deeper into some specific topics. The one we have up right now is called Porn in the Brain. Something called All Things Tech, that will be up soon. Intervention and recovery for young people who are already habituated users. Often they don't want to stop because they don't understand yet what the consequences are. That it will also be up by the end of the year. And we are in the process of developing, we're in the early stages, but we hope it'll be up by the end of this year or early 2021, is a whole enrichment on sex education through the lens of critical porn literacy. I mentioned earlier that sex education does not address pornography on the whole, and we want to equip sex educators with this information so that they know how to teach it. So parents are often asking, well, what do I say and how to say it? First of all, if you do discover that your child or a child that you know has been exposed to porn or has been using porn, it is so important not to blame or shame the child or yourself. So we have a little tip sheet called Compose Yourself. Take a breath, stay calm, think it through. You don't have to address it right in that moment. You can take an hour, you can take a day, you can take a couple days. Don't take too long. You don't want to wait too long, but you need to be in a place where you can talk to the child without blaming or shaming that child. We actually have conversation scripts. This is going to sound a little funny, but in both of our programs, we have conversation scripts. They're not bullet points. They literally lay out how a conversation can go. Obviously, a child at whatever age is not going to follow that script, but it gives parents and caregivers and educators an idea of how a conversation could go. And for each topic, we have 2 versions, one with a child or young person who is open to the conversation and receptive and responsive, and one for a child or young person that is resistant and maybe not sharing or offering as much. As I mentioned, these programs are multidisciplinary and collaborative. We have had expert consultants work with us from the fields of pediatrics, developmental psychology, neuroscience, adolescent therapy, sociology, other fields. If we don't talk to our kids about porn, the porn industry will. One of the things that I've been saying a lot lately is that porn has normalized violence in sex. We need to normalize conversations about the fact that they've done that and what the consequences are. So what are the challenges that we face? This is often too controversial for people to talk about, so they avoid it. We need to normalize these conversations and make it not controversial. I said that I was going to debunk some myths. One of the most prevalent myths out there, and I think one of the most dangerous, is not my kid myth. This notion that my kid is good, my kid would never look at porn, my kid isn't technologically savvy. It doesn't matter. It's not about being good or bad. It's also not being about technologically savvy. A child could be looking at a video on YouTube. This happened to someone who was in one of my presentations. Her daughter was 7 and watching a video on YouTube, and a totally appropriate video in the back of the car. And then all of a sudden, the mother heard something and thought, what's going on, and pulled over, and there was a really horrific porn thing that was on the screen. Again, this girl was 7, and she had just accidentally clicked a link. There's this other myth, the porn isn't that bad. I hope that I've completely debunked that in this presentation. And it's this, oh yeah, like it's like Playboy from the 80s. It is not. And the porn is sex positive myth. There's this notion that if you are concerned about the consequences of porn and the harms of porn, then you are sex negative. We really are trying to flip that on its head. And there's this whole notion that, well, if you're sex positive, you need to be into porn. We don't think that's true at all. In fact, we think that porn is very sex negative because of the way it depicts porn. There's also a sense of isolation and shame, which we are really trying to change by normalizing these conversations and bringing parents together to do these online programs. So in terms of some of our responses and solutions to this, and I'm still going to give you some tips before I'm done with this, but from an organizational perspective, we're doing a lot of consciousness raising, a lot of public relations to make sure that people are keying into this issue. And I do think that we are on the cusp of really significant change here. We are continuing to expand the programs that I just described to professionals. We actually just had someone from the American Pediatric Association reach out to us. They want to alter the program, tailor the program specifically for pediatricians, which would be absolutely amazing and have a significant impact. And we're also making some programmatic adjustments and enhancements. In addition to the enrichments I talked about, we are constantly updating our programs, and I just referred to something about bringing parents together to do these online programs in groups. Obviously, there'll be virtual groups, but we are talking about, and I hope that this will be operationalized in the next year or so, is actually a parent ambassador program. So that is Culture Reframed. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just making a couple other points that I want to make about what parents can do. I think one of the things that parents often think is, and I mentioned this before, oh, just the one porn talk. So Al Vernaccio is someone I'll be interviewing in a couple of months in a Facebook Live event through Culture Reframed. He wrote a book called For Goodness Sex. And one of the things that he says that I just love is that it's not about having one 100-minute conversation. It's about having 100 one-minute conversations, which I think is just right on. And I use it all the time, and I credit him with it because I just think it's exactly how we need to think about these conversations. 100 one-minute conversations. There are so many opportunities. The culture has given us so many opportunities. Billboards, magazines, TV shows, everywhere you look, you could be having these conversations with young people. And I think something that DeAndre said earlier, and I loved that she did this, was she said, in case you have these conversations, and then said, wait, let's initiate these conversations. And I think that's exactly right also, because they are going to be exposed to porn. That doesn't mean they will keep going back, but they will be exposed to porn. Their friends will be exposed to porn. The way young people are relating to each other in relationship is different, and it is porn informed. So this is why our organization is called Culture Reframed. It is fundamentally changing the culture, and we are going to see that more and more. We already know some of what those indicators are. We see the evidence, we see the signs of that. We will actually start to see that a whole lot more in 10 to 15 years, I think. So that's something to pay attention to and be aware of. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Oh my gosh, Samantha, this has been amazing. I did hear Dr. Dines one time do a presentation. You guys are different, but the information is it's just always overwhelming.
I know.
So many, yeah. I took so many notes tonight again, several pages. But we do have a question from one of our ambassadors, and a gentleman who actually works with Men Stopping Violence, and he does conversations. They have groups of men, but he wanted you to explain to those in the Zoom room tonight, what does self-objectify mean?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So those hypersexualized images, right, that I was showing you, that the selfies that young women are taking, it's basically internalizing an objectified view of
Mm-hmm.
yourself, and often hypersexualized. So it's an internalized objectification.
Right. Okay. And
Does that
then,
help?
yeah, Greg, are you still here with us?
I think so. Yeah, I see him.
I am here.
Thanks for that question.
Yes. Did that help? And did you have any other questions before we move on to, I think Randy asked a question about education. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm good for now. I may have another question in a minute.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So Randy, I think your question may have been answered, Samantha, when you talked about the schools and the teachers. But the point about the child-on-child sexual abuse and how to stop it. So that, I'm sure that's a question that that folk would be interested in hearing the answer to. Is there a lot of that, a familiar type of relationships that happen? And
So as I mentioned, we don't have the actual research. This is anecdotal information from what are called SANE nurses, sexual assault nurses, and clinics that are seeing increases in child-on-child sexual abuse. And it's kind of a crazy thing to call a 6-year-old a perpetrator, but that's what's happening. Like a 6-year-old is perpetrating sexual violence on a 4-year-old. And they are specifically enacting things that they have seen or been exposed to through pornography. Whether schools and teachers are informed about that, I don't know the answer to that. But I do think it is beginning. We have heard about it a lot at various conferences of professionals. So I do think it is becoming more a part of the conversation, and there is increased awareness.
Right. So I thought, thanks for that answer too. I think she said something about self-esteem in girls and boys. How does this affect? This is so insightful and definitely needed to help break the taboo around these types of conversations. Can these affect self-esteem in girls and boys? What are we seeing with the self-esteem issues?
Yeah, so is this question, I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Are you asking if the conversations can help affect the self-esteem in girls and boys? We do know from the research that pornography, self-objectification, viewing all the hypersexualized media does affect self-esteem in negative ways. So that is what the research is showing. In terms of, I mean, we don't have research on what conversations that we're advocating do in terms of self-esteem. We are beginning to evaluate and assess our programs. I would venture to say that having these conversations and having young people feel empowered certainly does. There is something that I can share with you, which is that that we do know from the research, is that when sex education actually elevates pleasure for girls, the self-esteem is increased, and they are much more likely to express healthy boundaries, insist on safer sex measures, that kind of thing. So we know that when girls' pleasure is elevated in sex education curricula, that has an effect.
Okay. And then Faith, we just talked about this a little earlier about the Netflix cuties. What can we do to remove it? So there is something that's out online to sign to be able to, join in and removing that off of Netflix. So what I can do, Faith, is I can find out what that is and send that over to you tonight, because there's a platform that Samantha, you seem like you may have more
Well,
information?
we just released it. We just issued a press release today
Oh,
on
okay.
that. So, and that'll be up on our website, I'm sure. We also sent out, I don't know how many of you are on our email list, but we sent out a press release. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation has put out a call to remove it. I know that another organization, Enough is Enough, is on this issue. A whole lot of people are actually ending their subscriptions or canceling their subscriptions on Netflix. So there is a call to address this issue. We didn't put out a call for specific action. We put out a call for having these conversations about hypersexualization. And I'm glad that someone has brought it up, because there is a real outcry and outrage, and trying to address hypersexualization using the same visual grammar that pornography uses is not the way to do it.
Right. Thank you, Randy. Randy has put up the
Oh, great.
where you can go and sign on change.org. So that's great. Thank you for doing that for us.
Yeah.
I just wanted to just kind of high five what you said earlier about these conversations. And that I think it's really important that we, number one, debunk those myths. I like the idea that you guys have that as a part of your presentation, as well as normalizing the conversation so that it's not something that's so stigmatized that, you know, kids are like you say, they're just sitting there, you know, not wanting to have the conversation with their parents. But I think this is something that parents have really got to begin to have the conversation. I mean, these kids are running into this more often. It's a part of the culture. I like the fact that you guys are putting up programs for tweens and teens. That's awesome. Just absolutely fantastic. We want to definitely be able to link over to you all so that all of our subscribers and folk who visit our websites can go there as well, so that they will have that information. So that's great.
Great. There are two, can I jump in and just share two things about the conversations? One is, one little tip that people can use is, you know, the like stop, drop, and roll with fire, right? There can be a little bit of there can be an equivalent for young people, specifically children, to say, if you see porn, then it's a little bit stop, drop, and roll, run and talk to a parent. Run and tell a parent what you've seen. So if you can get that into their minds. And the other thing is that if you can have conversations with young people about pornography, you can have conversations with young people about just about anything. So we like to think that this is building parenting skills more broadly.
Absolutely. So did anyone else on the call have any other questions that you wanted to ask? Now's the time. I'll forever hold your peace. I'm about to give the announcements.
I want to encourage people. You actually can reach out to me. It's not now or never. If you have a question that you either don't feel comfortable asking now, or that you want to ask at another time, or you think of later, you can always email me at info@culturereframed.org, and I will absolutely respond.
Okay, I'm sure Randy's about to put that in the chat box for you. The information to contact
and it's culturereframed.org. We're easy to find.
Okay, all right. So so I want to once again thank you, before I go to the announcements, for definitely joining us tonight. We will be sharing this presentation with those who are in our circles of influence, to let them know that this is available, that they can go and watch, and those coalition partners that we have will also let them know that it's available. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to make sure that I announce our next program, which will be happening next Saturday. And that program is entitled Criminalization of Girls. We will have Dr. Charnel Miles here with us, as well as Yasmin Baffa from Rights for Girls. Thank you, Randy, for putting that up. And they will come and talk about things that are happening around our girls in the criminalization system. And once again, we're going with that 3 things to know and do. So we want you to join us for that, as well as for those of you who don't know, we have weekly trainings Tuesday through Thursday IHTI has weekly trainings on trafficking. We have a training that's labor and sex trafficking, as well as our training for parents, where we're talking to parents about traffic proofing their kids. All in all, we want to traffic proof Georgia. And since the pandemic, we have been traffic proofing the world. So we want you to join us, to have organizations and groups let us know that they're interested in being trained as well. And I think I am going to leave the last parting word to Samantha. If you want to just give us a parting word and just a word of encouragement even, that would be great.
Yes, it's what I said before. Thank you again for having me tonight and for all of you spending your time on this. Again, it is not hopeless. The information can be really overwhelming. It's not hopeless. It's not too early and never too late. And you can really make a huge difference. If you're interested, I did do a Facebook Live event in April or May. I can't remember now. That is on our website. And that is a 20-minute, really targeted talk on specific things that you can do around technology that is hopeful and empowering. So I would encourage you to look at that as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Samantha.
Thank you.
You guys have a good night. Stay safe, be well, and we hope to see you next week for our next critical conversation. Thanks, Randy, for all of your help. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.